On already? Hi, I'm Gus. I worked on the Railbelt decarb project with Phylicia this summer. I'm sure you guys have already seen enough of this slide. Okay, so fortunately, Dallas already pretty much broke this down for me. So the decarb project is pretty much just looking at a whole bunch of different pathways to reach a carbon-free emission goal by 2050 along the Railbelt. This subsection of the project, which I worked on, looks at implementing nuclear as the primary. So the main goals are we want to identify we wanted to identify which SMR was going to work for this instance or this region. We wanted to look at where we could implement these things. We wanted to know, well, we had to scale it so the overall objective is we want to offset the natural gas as well as coal generation along the rail belt, which I think there's off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but there's around 1,500 megawatts of capacity along the rail belt right now, based in primarily natural gas as well as coal. So we're looking at offsetting that or attempting to, and then we want to construct and run power, or at least dynamic power systems models using PSSE, which will primarily be continued in the fall. So I know there's been, a large bit of research into microreactors, specifically in like isolated grids with ACEP. I'm not, the textbook definition's a little hazy, but microreactors are about rated up to 10 megawatts electrical output. We're looking at hundreds of megawatts along the rail belt. So it's really kind of a whole different field, not different field, but different scope. So when we run our power systems models, as well as our economic models in Plexos, we are going to pair nuclear with existing as well as planned solar, wind, and hydro, and gas and coal are also up there. I just didn't put it in. So this is kind of redundant as to the previous two slides. One point of emphasis is that first bullet point has already been completed, and Phylicia has a paper out on that right now for the load forecasting between now as well as 2050. And then kind of going back through, look at the loads, what SMR is going to work, where to put them, what size, and then run the models. So I'll go into a lot more depth in the next couple slides, but we ended up going with NuScale's Voyager models for the nuclear SMRs. We ended up going with Beluga as well as the Healy existing power plants to where we're going to put them. The three primary reasons were they both possess the existing infrastructure as well as workforce. They both already linked to the rail belt. They have pretty large transmission capacities, as well as with Healy, it's accessible both by road and rail, as in Beluga is accessible by road. So kind of the big thing with that is a lot of the modern day SMR manufacturers are saying that to reduce both cost and time, that they're going to manufacture their SMRs in factory and then ship to the site. So access was pretty big. Kind of go more into the depth of the sizing on the next slide, but yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so I've just kind of blown up the rail belt map here for those of you who don't know where Healy as well as Beluga are at. So Beluga is kind of on the other side of the inlet from Anchorage, and then Healy is, I'm not sure how far south it is, about an hour and a half from south of Fairbanks. So the top table shows you kind of what a specific SMR for NuScale is. So they're rated about 77 megawatts electrical output for every 250 megawatts thermal. So they're about 30.8% efficient. They are a pressurized water reactor, which I'll go over on the next slide, how those work. They operate on low enriched uranium, which is pretty much the most common fuels type for all SMRs. And these things can operate for about 24 months without refueling. So like I said on the previous slide, if I can go back, these three plants, NuScale manufactures a 12 module plant as well as a 6 and a 4 module plant. That's just stating how many modules of their SMRs are operating in each plant. So you can see, so there's kind of basic, there's 12 of those SMR modules in their flagship plant, the 12 megawatt plant. You can see how much, what the total electrical output is for those. So one of the neat things with these is that they can be easily scaled. So, when I was first reading about them, you would think that the Voyager 6 plant might be, roughly half the price of the 12 module plant, which isn't the case because all the infrastructure is exactly the same You just don't have the same installed capacity. So you're able to kind of boost those up as, you know, the load demand increases over time. You can begin to install more and more modules. So we are going to put this still a little bit up for debate until the economic modeling is done in Plexos, which if you have questions on that, I have not touched. That's all Jeremy Vandermeer. So right now, to meet the to produce enough contingency reserve, as well as be able to meet 100% of the peak load on the Railbelt, we have 4 Voyager 4 units installed in Healy, as well as a Voyager 12 and Voyager 6 unit installed in Beluga. You can see in the bottom table what that amounts to. So we have about, if we were to install those today, we'd have about 2,000 megawatts electrical on the Railbelt being produced through nuclear. If you were to boost all those up to Voyager 12 plants over time, you could get up to around 3,700 megawatts of that. Another appealing thing with Beluga is if transmission upgrades do take place, you'd be able to create a transmission loop if you produced submarine cables linking Beluga Power Plant to Kenai, which would be pretty sweet. Whoops. So here's kind of a schematic of how those pressurized water reactors work. They are the most common method in the United States as well as globally. They make up about 65% of the current reactor fleet in the US and about 70% worldwide. They have 2 primary circuits. You can see on the furthest left. So you have water being pumped through the reactor at incredibly large amounts of pressure to prevent boiling. That heated water is then pumped through the secondary circuit, which is at a much lower pressure, which is boiled to produce steam, to produce or spin a turbine to make a light bulb work. Magic. So I am pretty confident I can make an 8-minute presentation on all the software challenges we had with installing PSSC on our computers, but that might be a little bit boring to go over. Another challenge I know Jeremy encountered initially was with load following and producing pretty high capacity factor along the Railbelt. So I think I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but about 90% of the total cost with nuclear plants is in the installation, like overnight capital cost. So if you're not running them, you're just losing money constantly. So if you have if your load is dropping and if you don't have the plant turned on, really not optimal. So one of the things we're thinking about doing is pairing it with pumped hydro storage in an attempt to load follow. If any of you can pronounce that town in Russia, I'd be greatly appreciative. They have a floating SMR plant in the far east of Russia, which they use cogen for desalination purposes. So similar process, we would just use pumped hydro. Changes, my reference management is an absolute mess, which made for a bit of a hassle when it came to citations in the paper, even with Sotero. So successes, last year looked at similar nuclear, more microreactor scale. Since it's still so far in development, there's not a whole lot of data available on nuclear, especially when you got things like ramp rates and things like that. Fortunately, NuScale is pretty far along in their model, so that was a surprising success for me. But in this project, we are only looking at electrical loads. So, you know, it's kind of more of a curiosity. How would our models change if we did have or factor in our heating loads? Didn't really have many things I disliked about the summer. You know, I think we all had lag time. Fortunately, I had an amazing mentor with Phylicia who was more than happy to give me different miscellaneous tasks to prevent boredom. What I enjoy most, you know, it's really the writing and putting your own research into your own words was pretty fun. I think that's it. Question? Anna? Yeah, so the question is pretty much where would the depleted fuel rods be sent after their useful lives? I don't have a slide on that. It's a pretty big issue when it looks at waste management. Wish I double checked before I got up here, but there's a lot of research going into where you're going to put them. They're kind of not water beds, but you have beds where you kind of recycle spent fuel after their lifetime. And then there's a lot of research primarily in, I think it's Finland or Sweden going on into burying these things pretty deep, like miles deep into bedrock. And then, so I can't remember exactly the process, but you take the fuel rods, you surround them in some sort of human engineered substance, whether it be concrete or something like that. And then you pretty much bury it in a deep borehole. I have writing on that if you are more curious. Yeah, Cole.
That you want the nuclear as much as possible because of the high cost. Then paired with pumped hydro, with the expansion of solar and wind, there are more variable sources. Those would be that pumped hydro. Do you think there's enough capacity to have nuclear also be added to pumped hydro?
Added to pumped hydro. So we would pair. So the question, could you?
Like if you have a reservoir that's already full from wind and solar, for example, you might not be able to offload.
Yeah. Okay. So we would not be pairing. We would be pairing pumped hydro specifically with nuclear. We wouldn't be looking at any of the other variable resources. And we might not even end up going with pumped hydro. That was kind of just, in one of the meetings, we were thinking of how could we possibly load follow since the machines don't do it themselves.
A lot of because of how geographically restricted pumped hydro is, depends where you're located. You might be able to add it. It adds an extra restriction.
Yeah, that's something we really haven't looked at all that much yet. It's spitballing right now.
Okay.